February 19, 1945. 0900 hours. Iwo Jima. The volcanic sand is black and soft beneath their boots. Swallows every step. The air tastes like sulfur and salt. Explosions walk across the beach in measured intervals. Shrapnel hisses overhead. Somewhere in the smoke, Mount Suribachi looms like a waiting predator. Private First Class Archibald Mosley grips another crate of ammunition. 70 pounds. His hands are steady. Around him, Black Marines of the 8th Ammunition Company move with practiced efficiency. They are not supposed to be heroes. They are not supposed to be here at all. Japanese officers had laughed at intercepted intelligence about Negro troops. Weakness, they said. Proof of American desperation. Propaganda leaflets mocked their presence. The Reich agreed. But propaganda doesn't unload ammunition under artillery fire. It doesn't carry wounded men through killing zones. It doesn't bleed the same red on black sand. The Marines don't respond to the mockery. They have spent their entire lives answering hatred with action. Today will be no different. The beach erupts again. They keep moving. The story begins long before Iwo Jima. It begins in a country at war with itself. In 1940s America, 17 states enforced Jim Crow laws. Black citizens could not drink from the same fountains, could not sit in the same train cars, could not attend the same schools. They were citizens by law, second class by practice. The military reflected this reality with precision. When war erupted in Europe, the United States Marine Corps maintained a policy it had held since 1798. No black men allowed. The Navy accepted them as mess attendants. The Army placed them in segregated units, often assigned to labor battalions far from combat. The message was clear. Black Americans could serve their country, but only in positions that reinforced their supposed inferiority. Then came Pearl Harbor. December 7, 1941. Suddenly, America needed every able body. The demand for troops became impossible to ignore. On June 25, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, pressured by civil rights leaders and wartime necessity. The Marine Corps would finally accept black recruits. But acceptance came with conditions. The first black Marine recruits arrived at a hastily constructed training facility in North Carolina, Montford Point. It sat adjacent to Camp Lejeune, separated by fences and unspoken boundaries. White Marines trained at Lejeune. Black Marines trained at Montford Point. Same uniforms. Same flag. Different worlds. The instructors were white. Many arrived with Southern prejudices intact. The training was deliberately brutal. Some officers believed black men lacked the discipline for military service. They designed the program to prove it. Instead, they created something else entirely. The Montford Point Marines endured longer marches, harsher punishments, and constant psychological pressure. They were told they were inferior. They were told they would fail. They were told the Marine Corps did not want them. They graduated anyway. By 1943, over 19,000 black men had completed training at Montford Point. They were Marines. But the Corps still would not allow them in combat infantry roles. They were assigned to depot companies, ammunition companies, supply battalions, support roles. The dangerous, thankless work of keeping a war machine running. The irony was not lost on them. They were trusted to handle explosives and supplies, but not trusted to fight beside white Marines. They would carry ammunition to the front lines but not fire it themselves. They would load the guns that others would be celebrated for shooting. This was the deal. Serve in the shadows. Prove your worth through labor, not valor. And still they served. Because the enemy abroad threatened everyone. Because fascism and racial supremacy in Europe and Asia were evils that transcended domestic injustice. Because proving their courage might, someday, change the minds that denied them equality. They trained knowing they were not wanted. They deployed knowing they would not be celebrated. They fought knowing their country did not yet believe in them. But they believed in the idea of what America could become. The Axis powers watched this contradiction with satisfaction. They saw opportunity in America's racial divide. German propaganda ministries produced leaflets specifically targeting black American soldiers. The messages were crafted with precision. Why fight for a country that lynches you? Why die for freedoms you do not possess? The Reich offered false sympathy while preaching their own doctrine of racial hierarchy. To the Nazis, black soldiers were proof of American degeneracy and desperation. The Japanese military took a different approach, but arrived at the same conclusion. Their propaganda portrayed black troops as inferior warriors, cannon fodder sent by white commanders who valued their lives as expendable. Japanese officers were taught that racial purity determined martial capability. The samurai spirit, they believed, could not exist in those they deemed racially inferior. This was not merely propaganda. It shaped tactical assumptions. Enemy commanders underestimated units with black soldiers. They assumed these units would break under pressure, would lack discipline, would retreat when tested. They were catastrophically wrong. By 1944, black soldiers had already proven themselves across multiple theaters. The 92nd Infantry Division fought through Italy's mountains. The 761st Tank Battalion smashed through German lines in France, earning a commendation from General Patton himself. The Tuskegee Airmen dominated European skies, never losing a bomber they escorted. The 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion landed at Normandy on D-Day, the only black combat unit on those beaches. In the Pacific, black port companies and construction battalions built the infrastructure that enabled island-hopping campaigns. They worked under Japanese air raids and artillery bombardment. They unloaded ships, built airfields, and supplied forward positions while under fire. Their casualty rates told a story the official records tried to minimize. Recognition came slowly, grudgingly, in scattered moments. White officers who fought beside them wrote reports praising their courage. Enlisted men shared foxholes and found common ground in survival. But institutional racism remained intact. Then came Iwo Jima. The island was strategically critical. Located 760 miles south of Tokyo, it sat directly along the B-29 bombing route to the Japanese mainland. American bombers flying from the Mariana Islands needed emergency landing strips. Fighters needed a forward base to escort them. Iwo Jima provided both. But taking it would cost everything. The Japanese had transformed the 8-square-mile island into a fortress. General Tadamaki Kuribayashi commanded 21,000 troops dug into 11 miles of tunnel, caves, and reinforced bunkers. He had studied American tactics. He knew Marines would hit the beaches in overwhelming numbers. So he prepared a strategy of attrition. Let them land. Then bleed them in yards. The Americans knew this too. They understood the casualties would be staggering. Every Marine would be needed. Every role would matter. Including the roles assigned to black Marines. The 8th Ammunition Company, 36th Depot Company, and 38th Depot Company received their orders in January 1945. They would hit the beaches early. They would supply the invasion force with everything needed to sustain combat: ammunition, water, rations, medical supplies, fuel. They would work on the beaches under direct fire, moving supplies from ships to fighting positions. It was a support role. It was also a death sentence. The Marines did not protest. They loaded their ships and prepared for deployment. They knew what awaited them. They knew how they would be perceived. They knew the enemy considered them weak. They would answer that assumption the way they had answered everything else. On the beaches. Under fire. With actions too loud for propaganda to drown out. Behind every statistic was a man with a story. Private James Davis from Mississippi had watched his father denied the right to vote. Corporal Robert Greene from Georgia had attended a segregated school with outdated textbooks and no heating. Sergeant Timerlate Curvin from South Carolina had seen crosses burned in his neighborhood. They enlisted anyway. Their motivations were complex. Some believed military service would earn respect for their communities. Others sought escape from lives with limited options. Many understood that fascism abroad represented the same hatred they faced at home, magnified and militarized. If Hitler won, Jim Crow would look like mercy. At Montford Point, they formed bonds forged through shared exclusion. They became brothers not just in arms but in purpose. When white Marines at Camp Lejeune refused to acknowledge them, they found strength in each other. When instructors designed impossible training standards, they met them together. When they were assigned to support roles instead of combat, they accepted it with quiet dignity. They did not need the Marine Corps to believe in them. They believed in each other. Ammunition companies were the arteries of any amphibious assault. Without them, riflemen became useless. Without them, artillery fell silent. Without them, the entire invasion collapsed. The job was simple in concept, lethal in execution. Ships anchored offshore carried tons of supplies: mortar rounds, rifle ammunition, grenades, flamethrower fuel, medical kits, rations, water. This had to reach the fighting positions inland. Between the ships and the fighting positions lay killing zones. Exposed beaches, open terrain, Japanese observers with perfect sight lines. Ammunition companies worked in this void. They transferred supplies from ship to shore using landing craft. They unloaded under fire. They organized supply dumps while artillery bracketed their positions. They drove trucks through contested areas. They carried crates on their backs when vehicles couldn't move through volcanic sand. They worked 18-hour shifts because stopping meant Marines died for lack of bullets. The casualty rate for these companies often exceeded infantry units in the opening days of an assault. They were easier targets. They moved predictably. They worked in concentration, not dispersion. A single shell into a supply dump could kill 20 men and destroy vital material. The Marines knew this. They did it anyway. Japanese intelligence officers had monitored American racial dynamics for years. They understood the segregation, the discrimination, the violent suppression of black communities. They believed this created a fundamental weakness. Orders to Japanese troops included assessments of enemy units by racial composition. White American Marines were considered dangerous but predictable. Black American troops were assessed as poorly trained, poorly motivated, likely to retreat under pressure. This assumption shaped defensive planning. If black units could be identified and targeted, Japanese commanders believed entire sectors might collapse. Psychological warfare efforts specifically targeted them with broadcasts and leaflets emphasizing their mistreatment in America. General Kuribayashi was more cautious. He had studied in America, understood its industrial capacity and will. But even he accepted the premise that segregated units represented a vulnerability to exploit. The tunnels of Iwo Jima were prepared with this confidence. The artillery pieces were sighted with this assumption. The soldiers waited with this expectation. None of them understood what was coming. Iwo Jima's black volcanic sand was unlike anything the Marines had encountered. It wasn't sand at all but volcanic ash. Fine as powder, deep as quicksand. Vehicles sank to their axles. Men sank to their knees. Every step required double the effort. Every load felt twice its weight. The beaches offered no cover. They sloped gently, providing Japanese gunners on Mount Suribachi and the northern highlands with unobstructed fields of fire. Every square meter was pre-sighted by artillery. Mortar teams had calculated precise coordinates for every potential supply dump location. Landing craft couldn't beach properly. The ash created false bottoms. Boats would ground 50 yards offshore, forcing Marines to wade through surf while carrying 70-pound loads. Some drowned under the weight. Others were cut down in the water. Once ashore, the supplies had to be organized under fire. Ammunition sorted by caliber. Medical supplies separated from rations. Water containers stacked and distributed. All while shells landed in random patterns designed to maximize casualties and chaos. There were no safe zones. No rear areas. Japanese artillery could reach every inch of the island. Snipers worked in caves, emerging to fire and disappearing before return fire arrived. The Black Marines worked through it. They developed systems. Hand signals when radio communications failed. Human chains when vehicles couldn't move. Improvised shelters using supply crates. They adapted because stopping meant dying, and dying meant their brothers went without ammunition. The black NCOs leading these companies carried double burdens. They commanded men in combat while knowing their leadership would be questioned simply because of their skin color. Staff Sergeant Timerlate Kervin of the 8th Ammunition Company understood this. So did Platoon Sergeant James Whitlock. So did every black sergeant and corporal who gave orders on those beaches. They led without the authority structure that supported white officers. They could not rely on institutional respect. They earned obedience through competence, earned trust through shared risk, earned loyalty through never asking their men to do what they wouldn't do first. When supply dumps were hit, sergeants were first to organize fire suppression. When landing craft arrived under fire, they were first off the ramp. When wounded men needed evacuation, they carried stretchers themselves. This leadership style was born from necessity but proved devastatingly effective. Their men followed because they witnessed courage, not because regulations demanded it. In the chaos of Iwo Jima, where command structures fractured and communications failed, this personal leadership held units together. White officers who witnessed it wrote reports. Some with surprise. Some with respect. All with recognition that what they were seeing contradicted everything they had been taught about race and command capability. Every black Marine on Iwo Jima carried this contradiction. They were fighting for a country that did not yet fight for them. They wore the uniform of a nation that denied them basic dignity. They risked their lives for freedoms they could not access. When they returned home, if they returned, they would still face segregated buses, denied housing, restricted voting. The GI Bill would theoretically cover them, but banks would deny loans, universities would reject applications, communities would enforce color lines. They knew this. They deployed anyway. Some found purpose in proving their worth. Others believed their sacrifice might change hearts. Many simply understood that the alternative, Axis victory, would be worse. Hitler's racial doctrines made Jim Crow look restrained. Japanese imperialism showed no mercy to conquered peoples. So they fought. Not for the America that existed, but for the America that might exist. Not for gratitude, but for dignity. Not for recognition, but for the right to say they had stood when it mattered. This moral complexity gave them strength. They had nothing to prove to the enemy. They had everything to prove to their own country. And on Iwo Jima, they would prove it in the only language that transcended prejudice: courage under fire. February 19, 1945. Chower. 0900. The naval bombardment lifts. For 3 days, American warships have pounded Iwo Jima with 22,000 shells. The island looks dead. It is not. The first wave of Marines hits the beaches. The 8th Ammunition Company follows in the 4th wave. Their landing craft lurches through surf turned gray with ash. The ramp drops. Private First Class Archibald Mosley steps into chaos. The volcanic sand swallows his boots immediately. He sinks to his shins. Around him, Marines struggle forward carrying equipment. The beach is already crowded with men and machines. Disabled vehicles create obstacles. Casualties lie where they fell. Mount Suribachi erupts. Artillery shells walk across the beach in devastating patterns. Mortars fall in clusters. Machine gun fire sweeps from concealed positions. The Japanese have waited for this moment, for the beaches to fill with targets too concentrated to miss. Mosley reaches his first supply dump location. Crates need to be unloaded, organized, and moved forward. The work begins. An 8th Ammunition Company Marine named William Folks grabs a crate of mortar rounds. 70 pounds. He moves 10 yards before a shell impact throws him flat. He gets up, grabs the crate, keeps moving. This becomes the rhythm. Move, duck, move again. Corporal Charles Anderson organizes a human chain from landing craft to supply dump. Men pass ammunition hand to hand. It's faster than carrying individual loads through the sand. It also means 20 men standing exposed instead of scattered. A mortar round lands in the chain. 3 men go down. The chain reforms around them. Corpsmen drag the wounded aside. The supplies keep moving. By noon, the 36th Depot Company has taken 15% casualties. They have also delivered 40 tons of ammunition to fighting positions. The 38th Depot Company loses 4 men in the first hour. They respond by working faster. There is no room for fear. Fear is a luxury. There is only the next crate, the next landing craft, the next supply run. Private James Davis watches a white Marine officer, a captain, directing fire from an exposed position. The officer takes shrapnel to the leg. He falls. Japanese machine gunners adjust their fire toward him. Davis moves without thinking. 50 yards of open beach. Bullets snap past. He reaches the officer, grabs him by the equipment harness and drags him toward cover. The captain outweighs him by 40 pounds. The sand fights every step. They reach a disabled Amtrak. Cover. Davis signals for a corpsman. The captain is conscious, staring at him. Not with gratitude yet. With surprise. With recognition of something that contradicts his assumptions. Davis returns to his unit. There is work to do. By 1600 hours, the beach is a graveyard. Wrecked landing craft litter the waterline. Supply dumps burn. Bodies lie covered with ponchos. The casualties are staggering. But the supplies keep moving forward. The Black Marines are everywhere in this chaos. Loading. Unloading. Organizing. Rescuing. Bleeding. They are not supposed to be heroes. They are doing the work that heroes depend on. Somewhere in a Japanese command bunker, officers review reports. American Negro troops on the beaches. Expected to break. Expected to retreat. The reports say they are working faster than white units did at Tarawa. The reports say they work through casualties that would panic support troops. The reports say something is wrong with the intelligence assessment. The laughter is dying. February 21, 1945. Day 3. Mount Suribachi still dominates the southern beaches. Every Marine working below is exposed to observation and fire from its slopes. The 8th Ammunition Company establishes a forward supply dump directly in its shadow. The location is tactically necessary and tactically suicidal. Staff Sergeant Timerlake Kervin coordinates the operation. Supplies must reach the Marines assaulting Suribachi's base. The route crosses 400 yards of open terrain under constant artillery fire. Kervin organizes shuttle runs using any vehicle that still moves and men carrying loads when vehicles fail. He makes 12 runs himself. On the 13th, his truck takes a direct hit. He crawls out with burns and shrapnel wounds. refuses evacuation, organizes the next convoy from a shell crater. A white lieutenant from the 28th Marines watches this. Later, he will write in his report, "I have never seen greater courage under fire." February 23, 1945. Day 5. The flag goes up on Suribachi's summit at 1020 hours. Every Marine on the island sees it. The Black Marines of the Depot Company see it too. They are not in the famous photograph. They were never going to be. But their ammunition made the climb possible. Their supplies sustained the assault. Their casualties bought the time needed. The celebration is brief. Mount Suribachi is taken, but the main Japanese defenses lie ahead in the island's north. The worst fighting is still coming. February 26, 1945. Day. The 36th Depot Company is moving ammunition to the front lines near Airfield No. 2. A Marine observation post takes heavy fire. 3 men are wounded, trapped in a position the Japanese have zeroed. Evacuation is impossible. Fire is too intense. Private First Class James Whitlock sees this. He is not infantry. He is not trained for assault. He is a supply Marine whose job is to deliver ammunition, not use it. He grabs a rifle and 3 other men from his company. They move forward under covering fire from adjacent positions. They reach the observation post. They carry the wounded back one at a time through 150 yards of machine gun fire. All 4 Black Marines make it back. All 3 White Marines survive. No citations are issued. The action doesn't appear in official reports. But the men who were saved remember. The men who witnessed it remember. March 1, 1945. Day 11. Japanese resistance has stiffened into a battle of attrition. Every bunker is contested. Every cave is a fortress. The ammunition consumption is catastrophic. Mortars, grenades, flamethrower fuel, rifle ammunition. Everything is needed in quantities that exceed planning estimates. The Black Depot and ammunition companies work 20-hour shifts. They sleep in 4-hour rotations. They eat when they can. They work until their hands bleed, then keep working. The casualty rate among these companies now exceeds 30%. They receive replacements. The replacements become casualties. The cycle continues. But the supplies never stop moving. White Marines who initially refused to acknowledge them now seek them out. They trust these men to deliver under fire when others might hesitate. They trust them to work through bombardments. They trust them because trust is earned in blood, and these Marines have paid every price asked. In Japanese command bunkers, the intelligence reports are revised. The assessment changes. These are not inferior troops. These are Marines. The mockery has burned away. What remains is respect born from combat reality. The enemy learned what America was still learning. Courage has no color. Bullets do not discriminate. And on Iwo Jima's black sand, every Marine bled the same red. March 26, 1945. 0800 hours. General Kuribayashi sends his final message to Tokyo. Then he leads his remaining 300 men in a final banzai charge. By dawn, Iwo Jima is declared secure. 36 days of combat. The bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. The numbers tell part of the story. 6,821 Americans killed. 19,217 wounded. Nearly 27,000 total casualties to take 8 square miles of volcanic rock. 1/3 of all Marines who landed became casualties. Some rifle companies suffered 90% losses. The Black Marine casualties are harder to quantify. Official records categorize them under support units, buried in larger statistics. But the units tell their own story. The 8th Ammunition Company, 38% casualties. The 36th Depot Company, 41% casualties. The 38th Depot Company, 33% casualties. These are not combat infantry rates. These are rates that exceed many assault units. Private First Class James Davis survives. So does Archibald Mosley. Staff Sergeant Timer Lake Kervin is evacuated on day 22 with severe wounds. He will recover. Corporal Charles Anderson does not. He is killed on March 3 by artillery fire while organizing a supply convoy. He is 23 years old. The commendations begin quietly. White officers who fought beside Black Marines write reports that contradict decades of institutional prejudice. A lieutenant colonel from the 5th Marine Division files a detailed account of the 8th Ammunition Company's performance. He uses words like exemplary, courageous, and essential. He recommends unit citations. A captain from the 28th Marines writes about Private Davis's rescue of wounded officers under fire. He requests a Bronze Star. The request moves through channels that are unaccustomed to processing such requests for Black Marines. Letters arrive from white enlisted men. A corporal from Indiana writes to his family, "I saw Negro Marines work through hell itself. I saw them save lives. I was wrong about them. I was wrong about everything." A sergeant from Georgia writes something similar, then tears up the letter. Some changes happen in private first. Not all recognition is official. In the days after the battle, white Marines share cigarettes with Black Marines. They sit together in the ruins. They exchange stories. They acknowledge what words had failed to express, respect earned through shared horror. On March 28, a formal ceremony is held for the 5th Marine Division. The commanding general presents unit commendations. The Black ammunition and depot companies are included. They stand in formation wearing utilities still stained with volcanic ash and blood. They receive the recognition in silence. They are too exhausted for celebration.